My guest today is Dr. Terence Lester. I booked him based on a book that he's out with, or just coming from dropout to doctorate. And as the book is described here, Dr. Lester draws from his own experience navigating poverty, trauma, and structurally designed injustice while pursuing higher education to illustrate systemic barriers confronting Black communities. And as I was talking to you before, I think there are two issues in general and sort of the larger arena of American politics that the public says is a priority and politicians don't necessarily tackle directly and head on. One is housing, which I was talking about before, and the other is the public education system. And I thought this would be a great way to sort of try to jumpstart that conversation. Dr. Lester, it's good to meet you. Welcome to the ToddCast.
Chuck, I'm thrilled to be here and really excited about this conversation. I think, as you stated earlier in the side conversation, that education is should be one of our central focuses right now. I mean, you think about the massive amounts of students who are starting school back right now. I mean, my daughter started back a couple days ago. My son will start back Thursday, and I'm concerned. And, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Well, look, I first let's talk about your story. There's a few things about it that jump out. Obviously, you had a tough time growing up, and you certainly had plenty of people who intervened in the right way. And I think those experiences that you share are very uplifting. But give for those that haven't read the book, give the quick origin story and why you wanted to share this story.
Yeah, grew up in the city of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a native here, been here all of my life. Also do a lot of my, nonprofit work here, but, I grew up in a part of the city that was, deeply impoverished. I mean, I can travel back to the neighborhood now and still see dilapidated buildings, underfunded schools,
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, the divestment, the roads are, chaotic with all of the potholes, buildings are falling down, the whole nine, right? And so you have that aspect of growing up impoverished. I grew up in the context of a single parent household. I saw my mom work multiple jobs and just be like a godsend and a resilient lady to me and my sister. She went on to overcome a lot of her struggles and got her doctorate in clinical counseling, but
Wow.
grew up as a single parent, and that left me without any role models. I didn't have anybody to talk to about how to tie a tie or, what is the things I should be thinking about in terms of how do I matriculate through the educational system or even a dream about going to college. And so you have poverty, you have the way the city was structured because there's some
Mhm.
historical aspect of how Black communities were placed in impoverished settings. And then I had the trauma of my family, and then that kind of left me misguided. And so I made a lot of decisions that were, um, not healthy. I lived out of my car as a teenager. I ran away from home. I experienced homelessness. But then I had, several teachers and strangers who became family that encouraged me, and told me that I had more to offer the world. I went from, experiencing homelessness to graduating with a PhD, and I'm sure we will talk about that in my journey. But
Mhm.
get a chance to study the very thing that I had to overcome. So it's personal to me. It's not just something that is, something I'm reading in a book or anything.
Right. Well, what I think is so interesting here for you to help us navigate these structural issues, because now I feel like it's almost like you're trying to unpack, like, how did this happen and how do we make sure this doesn't happen
Yes.
to somebody else.
Yes.
And I think about when you grew when I think you and I are about the same age, maybe you're slightly younger, but you were growing up at a time that Atlanta was booming,
Mhm.
right? And so how did this metro area that was booming because this, I mean, I know this is true, and yet at the same time, not everybody was lifted up, and in fact, pieces of Atlanta were ignored. And look, Atlanta, I'm curious. Wait, Atlanta strikes me as we look at it from 60,000 feet, feels like a very diverse metro area. The more you get to know Atlanta, you realize it's a very segregated area. So looking back, what were some of the mistakes that you feel like the development of Atlanta, right? The growth of Atlanta, and why wasn't sort of shared prosperity?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the South, right? And we're still talking about the 1980s, which is post civil rights movement. We're starting to see major corporations like Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, CNN. Um, we Atlanta experienced the first black mayor, right, and that of Maynard Jackson, which that was like 1974. And so Maynard Jackson saw a lot of the racial divides and the economic divestment in terms of Black communities, right? And so he started to pioneer opportunities for Black communities, but there
Mhm.
was still a part of the city and its constituents that did not like that. I mean, Black people were still being excluded in many respects, but you did have a community, a pocket of people where there were Black businesses and there were things like that, but there was still a heavy divide. When it comes to poverty, I think the question that you're asking is, how does some people um, access upward mobility and then others do not? And me speaking personally, um, when I think about the community, poverty was hard to escape. I mean, there were not a lot of job opportunities, especially during the 1980s, and specifically in Atlanta. There were high concentrations of poverty in certain communities. I mean, if you look at the historical concepts, I go into this in my book about how the city was designed, how roads divided communities from, different communities.
By the way, this is repeated in play. I mean, St. Louis is one of my favorite
Yeah,
examples of this, but it's repeated in so many cities
so
where
many cities
the development of the interstates were used to segregate communities.
to segregate communities, and
Yeah.
I grew up on that side of town, and um, I I remember my mom, having to work 2 and 3 jobs. I hardly saw her, right? And it wasn't because she did not have the potential. She graduated from HBCU. It was just that she would always communicate. It was hard for her to get a career started. Um, I think the thing that became pivotal in her life, even watching her and how she communicated to me as her child, and I've grown to become who I am today. It's a relationship that gave her access. I mean, there are studies that show. I mean, there are many research studies that show that relational equity and relational wealth is one of the fastest ways that people are able to move and matriculate out of impoverishment. I mean, when we think about the wealth of relationships gives you access to community. It gives you access to wisdom. It gives you access to job opportunities. It gives you access to even education. I mean, and when you think about it, growing up in that time and that place in that city, for me, I just did not see a lot of those opportunities readily available for my community members. And one of the things that changed my life was the relationships that I started to develop, because I can go to my community right now and still see many people who were not able to access some of those relationships.
So I was just gonna that was sort of like what works? If you could advise, if you could go back into time, what works or what's working now, and why do you think there's still this barrier? Because I networking, right? This is the whole point of diverse. Where when we talk about diversity, I always say it's not about diversity of hiring; it's about diversity of experience, right? That ultimately, when you put together, for me, it was a newsroom. I wanted diversity of experience, of life experience, right? Socioeconomic diversity, because if you're trying to understand if you're trying to report for the entire American electorate, then you better have people who've experienced different facets of that.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
When you talk about diversity of experience in relationship to those who may be impoverished,
Mhm.
I guess my question to you before I answer is: does a person actually have exposure to the experiences that could shape them or bring out the potential that is there if they are not proximate to some of those relationships? Like I envision in my mind like the child in a family who's sleeping in a car, right? And their family is unhoused, and this student will get up, with however they get themselves prepared and go to a school that is Title I, that is underfunded. I mean, we talked about how tax dollars for school systems. That I imagine that child sitting in the classroom, probably with no socks, which is why we did some of the work that we do in
Mhm.
Title schools to provide resource centers, and that child cannot even connect with a lesson, socially, emotionally. You talk about social emotional learning. They're
Mhm.
kind of, you know, so focused on the suffering and the struggle that it's hard for them to actually experience some of the diverse experiences that you're communicating and see beyond, right, their environment, which is why I think you're saying we need diverse relationships. We need people in community to bring a network of resources relationally to build up those who may find themselves similar to like I was.
Well, look, I'll just say, I mean, I think just that the desegregating schools to me should have meant, making sure we have schools with different socioeconomic families in the same school.
Of course.
And that is something that I mean, in some ways, our school systems, and this is where I think the social injustice and the social inequities have sort of combined to I think really, I mean, I think the place where you see um, the most problems right now is in the sort of the public school system, because the social inequities then lead those with money or those with access to charters or magnet schools to get out of the system, and then it sort of isolates and segregates.
Correct. I mean, isn't that what redlining did?
It's exactly what redlining did, right, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I also talk about in the book, I draw a comparison between redlining in terms of housing, because we all know housing is important when we talk about education. To what I hear, I'm not saying that you're saying this, but I
Mhm.
talk about educational redlining,
Mhm.
right? Where you're
That's a
concentrating.
better way of putting it. I mean, and that's what it's turned into. Yeah.
Yeah, you remove uh, sort of like the diverse community of what could actually exist in the school, and you concentrate targeted populations within the context of school, and then that school may be left without resources. Is drawing upon how much the budget is for the school system based on the taxes that are paid by those who live in the community, all of those sorts of things. And so who is hurt at the end of the day? I believe the students are.
Always are. Yeah.
The educators who actually have goodwill and heart to show up in these settings, and in many ways, they're in the trenches, doing the best that they can to serve the student population, to hopefully, raise up our next leaders, our next dreamers, our next innovators. But in many ways, it's hard to dream of beyond those types of environments if you're a student coming from, um, that type of concentration of poverty.
It's, what I and to me, this is, it's sort of like you wanna understand why we're so polarized and why it feels as if some people don't even understand how other people live. Well, it's
Yeah.
because we are, we had made an effort to be a melting pot, and then all of a sudden, I would argue over the last, as we sort of legally said we should be in a melting pot, we then, as a society, resegregated,
Mm.
right? And I think it's not. You ask yourself, like, how did we get to this polarized moment that we are today? Well, it doesn't happen quickly, right? It happens incrementally, and it's like over time, the more you segregate out, the more you segregate, whether it's by religion or whether it's by socioeconomics or whether it's by race, well, then guess what? People don't understand how other people live. And
Right.
then when you don't have that, you have no empathy. And then all of a sudden everybody's a two-dimensional figure, not a three-dimensional figure, and we get into the sort of the negative stereotypes that are driving our politics today. So I know it sounds a little it's like could really this is 40 years of doing this, but I would argue that yes, you have to look at this as a cause, not the cause, but a contributor.
Yeah. What do you think is driving the separation these days? Um, from my lens, I would see how some people who may be connected to the community that I was fashioned in as always seeing the world as kind of being separate. I mean, there were some advances where, you could get accepted into certain colleges. My grandmother is 90, she just turned 93. She still shoots me text messages, right? Still
Nice.
live in the neighborhood where
Yeah.
I grew up. We have conversations and, you're talking to your grandmother and she starts telling her life story. Well, she was born in 1932. She remembers redlining. She remembers the assassination. She remembers not being able to work in certain stores. She talks to me about how she was had to go to school and it was like maybe 40, 50 kids in a class. Well, the beat down textbooks and all of those things. And so I'm just when I hear you talk, I'm thinking about her lens. But even just recently, I had a conversation with her, and she's still hoping that the world will be less separate. You know,
Yeah.
and to your point, I think
Well,
we
she's seen she could I
it's a shift, but as to your point, we are starting to see a resurgence of this kind of separate nature.
I'm curious. It's interesting you talk about your grandmother's optimism.
Yeah.
Now she saw us at a she saw the she was a lived in a society that treated her much worse, right,
Yes. Yes.
than you've been treated.
Sure.
Um, and so in her lifespan, she has seen progress, right?
Yeah.
And I think about this with, I always say, "Hey, I'm literally I started school 5 years away from segregation in Miami." Right? I
Oh,
I
wow.
joke that I was born in Miami and I graduated high school in Miami, right? I started school in 1977. Well, you know, it wasn't that much before then that you had in the Miami was a southern city like every other southern city and what that meant back in the late 60s and early 70s. And yet, so I grew up in a different way, right? And so I look at it and it's like, well, we haven't made much progress. And
Mm,
if you lived in the era that your grandmother did, it looks like we've made a lot more progress. So and in some ways, I get her optimism,
yeah.
but I also wonder, you know, will this be easier to have this conversation with political leaders once the entire generation that actually lived in segregated America goes, or is it going to be harder when that generation has completely died off?
Um, well, shout out to my grandmother who is just a beautiful woman and has a lot of hope and it has always had a lot of hope. I think I am the product of her sacrifice and labor and struggle and going through as well as my mother. And she
And I want
had,
to say this: you're an optimist, right?
yeah, oh
I don't.
yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
We're sitting here not
yeah,
being very optimistic here
yeah,
at the
I'm
moment,
very
but
optimistic,
but I got that from your book. You're an optimist,
No,
being
very,
a
very
man of
much
faith,
so.
right?
I
Yeah.
am a man of faith, man of hope. But I rely on the faith of like my grandmother. And to answer your question, I don't know. I
Mhm.
think the groundswell of what we see currently in the future, like when my grandmother transitions and that whole generation transitions away, I think we're having a totally different conversation. I think there will be more tension, obviously,
Mhm.
and but also the optimism in me, more opportunity to think beyond the ways in which we've done things, to come up with new things and new ways of actually solving issues. The optimist in me always looks for what is being missed and what are the opportunities of how we can actually change things, right?
Mhm.
Is educational institutions working currently? The
Yeah.
way that we're, stewarding our students. Do we need more diversity within the context of the educational settings? Should schools continue to be separate, right, based on wealth and income and all those things? Like, I think about a lot of those types of questions, and I think it's something that we will have to answer in practice in the coming days and years.
So how do we tackle this? Because I do think we have to rethink how the public school system works, right? As you just discussed, I think about where I live in my county, and there are whenever they redraw the lines, okay? I live in a wealthier part of the county, right? And when they redraw the lines, boy, do my neighbors get up in arms. Whoa, 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 whoa! I moved here for that school, right? How dare you draw me out of that school, right? So everybody
Mm.
gets parochial and all this stuff, right? I always say this, and oh, by the way, I'm in arguably one of the most liberal counties in America, okay, as far as voting is concerned. But everybody's a liberal for everybody else but themselves sometimes. Sorry, but um, it's clear that the way we fund that it feels like an outdated way to fund the schools. But what would be an alternative way, and should we think of it as an alternative way? And would just getting rid of the property tax function of schools, would that create the openness to coming up with a different way to decide how kids which schools kids go to?
I um I think that would break the system. Um and
Positively or negatively?
well, hey, you just said that, you know, some of your neighbors were really distraught when they start redrawing the lines, right? And
Uh-huh.
so I think one of the things that I'm curious as I hear you talk about this is how will people respond? Because we still live in a very much individualistic society, right? You just described. You're saying it's me, mine, and no more.
Always.
You
NIMBY,
know,
right?
yeah,
Everything's NIMBY. Yeah, it's a great idea, except not for me.
it's a great idea until it reaches your backyard or your front
Right.
yard, your porch, or is knocking at your door. And so, to be honest, I don't know. Um, and I'm saying that only because, man, people get up in arms if ask to get over in traffic, and now you're talking about
I
education.
know.
I
You're
think
right.
it's a very complex question to answer. However, I do believe in the stakeholder approach to decision making, right? How do
Mhm.
we get together local business owners, local doctors, local EMTs, local educators, people who may find themselves, vulnerable, people who are without resources, and create sort of like a roundtable of solution sharing, right? Where there can be ideas that actually emerge from the community versus a top down approach. I think we've seen the top down approach harm people in many ways. And so I'm open to all types of stakeholder approaches, which is one of the ways we do the work that we do in our community. Hmm.
Talk about your foundation, 'cause that this is where you're trying to work with, I think, some at-risk, families and trying to figure out how what have you learned there that if you could have more money, you would scale?
I I get really emotional about this. Um, one, because I want to acknowledge my privilege and where I am now, right? Um, I was able to complete a PhD, less than 1% of the population. I've been able to speak, to author books, all of those things. But I also think about my journey. I think about the times I would sleep in my car. I remember one time I was getting dressed out of 2 garbage bags going to high school, and I had dropped out. I decided to go back. My mom fought really hard for me to go back to high school. I was a 5th year senior. The proper term is 5th year persister. I remember the educators looking at me, labeling me, "Why is he still here?" I remember the meanness of my peers, but I
Which should have
also
been just the opposite, like, "Wow, you have you're willing to keep coming and stick this out?" Like, the teacher should have been you should have been a role model.
yeah, and I had this one teacher, Miss West, who pulled me aside and she says, "I want you to use my classroom as a sanctuary." I'm a 5th year senior in a 10th
Mhm.
grade geometry class.
Yeah.
She was the first person to call me brilliant and say, "I want to help to cultivate your brilliance." I graduated largely because of Miss West. The days when I didn't know I was gonna eat lunch, or I didn't know if I would have enough hope or, courage to continue forward, she pulled me aside. I mean, I think that is synonymous with the work that I'm largely doing, working with the organization Love Beyond Walls that I get a chance to serve in, for those who are unhoused. What does it mean to ensure that someone has access to their identification cards? Because you need ID to open a bank account, to get housing, to work a job, to validate who you are. What does it mean to build resource centers within the context of a school where if a family is unhoused and they're living in a motel or shelter or even their car and they don't have access to wash their children's clothes, can come into this center and those resources are there. So their child doesn't have to walk into a classroom and get bullied and disconnect from their lesson
Right.
for the day. When I think about community work, I'm thinking about all of the collaborators and stakeholders in our community that actually comes together to make sure that those who are least in the community have the resources that they need, whether that's exposure to mentorship, whether
Mhm.
that's exposure to showers. We just had a clothing store, a suit store, Bespoketure. Actually, it's a suit store that does tailor-made suits in the district of Hateville, Georgia, right?
Mhm.
It's a thriving community. Porsche's landed their headquarters there. This owner came to our center, right, in College Park because he knows that we work with, men and,
Mhm.
younger men who are unhoused, and he donates all of these suits. Why? Because he understands the connection between appearance and job interviews and work readiness. We have another volunteer who does carpentry, right? He decided to come and volunteer and show our community members how to learn some of these carpentry skills, right? So it's soft skills and hard skills. We have volunteers who help people research and identify, how to recover their documents. We have a food co-op, not only where people are coming to receive food, but community members are volunteering for other community members, right? We have a groundswell of community that says, hey, we see a need. We can't just exclude the need from our community. We need to
Mhm.
focus in on how we can all show up and best support our community because it's my, just my hope and it's my idea, and it's even my ethic when I show up to serve or volunteer within the context of organization, is that we have to be about the whole community. The way forward is together, not separate, right? Um, when I do something for my neighbor, right, or someone who may not
Mhm.
have as much as I have, I'm actually doing it for myself because when I invest in someone who is proximate to me, I'm actually building somebody else up in the context of my community to make
Right.
my community better, which is what I hear you saying.
Let me ask you this about, this debate about the homelessness crisis, which is, I think that there's no one answer to this issue, right? Affordable housing is certainly, some of the problem. Um,
Can I push back
Ye
a little
well,
bit?
that's what I want you to, because I think that this is the exact that's where I was leading my question to, which
Okay,
is
okay.
I think we often, um I think public policymakers don't spend enough time thinking about the why when it comes to homelessness or being
Mm,
unhoused.
mm.
And I guess I would say is what, you know, help these politicians. How would you advise them to be talking about this issue better and then solving and then helping to find solutions? And is there a government solution or is it more organizations like yours?
Yeah. Great question. One, I did my dissertation on the history of homelessness in this country. If you don't know, two homelessness eras, which I believe that we're heading into a third mass homelessness era. First happened during the Great Depression. Second happened in the 1980s, which we see mass contemporary chronic homelessness. Right. This third era that you bring about is the era of unaffordability. I can't afford, right? Last year, nationally, we see an increase in homelessness, right? In terms of the census, the data that actually came out of a growth of 18%. And I don't know if you know how they actually collect a census for those who are unhoused because
I
it's
did
not
not. That's what I'm curious. Yeah. How is it?
we
How does
we
they
we don't get they don't get a postcard in the mail, fill this out,
right?
return, right? There are volunteers that nationally actually go out and have to physically count, like hand, like I count, like I see you, I'm
Right.
counting you, I'm checking you off on the list. That's how they get the census for how many people they suspect were unhoused. Where that number is drastically more than what is reported nationally, only because if you're out of sight, you're out of mind and you're out of the count, right? And so we see that growing. Second, I do think we need more empathy as it relates to um, uh, creating supports for those who are unhoused. Let me tell you why. I did my entire dissertation on the state of Tennessee, which was the first state that made homelessness or sleeping outside a Class E felony. Now, we
Mhm.
had started to see ordinances and laws kind of rise over the last 40 years. You know, you can't stand there, you can't sit there. You can't food share here. You can't sleep in a car like in the state of Colorado. You'll get a ticket, right? Or you can't be in this certain part of the town. But when Tennessee actually felonized it, right, Class E felony, it opened up the floodgates for all these other cities. And now we have over 200. We saw the Supreme Court actually make a decision last year,
Mhm.
ruling in a case, first homelessness case in the last 40 years, Grant Pass versus Johnson, to say it was constitutional to punish, to lock those who are unhoused up if they are found sleeping outside, even if they have nowhere to go.
I'm looking at the
So
Bill of Rights. I haven't found anywhere where that's constitutional, but okay. But
no, no,
I mean,
it's not
it's an
constitutional.
astonishing ruling. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's like,
Yes.
what are you kidding me?
I mean,
Are
I
you
thought this
kidding
was
me?
a free country. Right. It
Exactly.
is.
If you
Yeah.
have nowhere to go, you have nowhere to go. The DOJ actually releases a brief, I think it was 2015, 2016, says that it's a violation of the Eighth Amendment rights if you actually punish someone or have, extra force on someone who is trying to practice life-sustaining activities if they have nowhere to go. So my answer is twofold. One, I think we need to reframe how we think about homelessness. Homelessness is not monolithic. And everybody who arrives at the fight has not arrived there from the same set of circumstances. There are mothers who are fleeing domestic violence. There are families who lost a loved one. There are people who got laid off. There was a community of people who became disabled or had a illness. In 2022, I was in a near fatal car accident. I couldn't walk. I was confined to a bed for almost 4 or 5 months. I had to learn how to walk again after being hit by a car. If
Mm.
my wife did not have insurance, right,
Right.
uh, um, I could have been, among the number. And I think, the reality is that many people don't even think about how half of America, right, are one paycheck away from the experience of homelessness, itself. And sometimes people only relegate the experience of homelessness to 2 narratives, right? There's a mental health condition, which we can
Yeah.
get into that, but the mental health system itself is overwhelmed. There's not
Right.
enough clinicians, and for even those who are housed, let alone providing
Right.
extra support for those without an address. And then there is the, moral failure, right? There's something wrong with your character. You're lazy. That's this sort of rhetoric.
Well, I'll give you one other that you hear. Well, some people want to be homeless.
Right, right, right.
You're like, really? I don't
Man,
know. All
man,
right, like go find me that person. But go ahead. Yeah.
nobody ever woke up and said, "I want to sign me up." You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nobody said, "Sign me up." That's the experience that I want for the rest of my life. And then 2, I just think, it takes all of us. And I think it takes government. I think it takes organizations. I think it takes people who are not even connected to organizations. I think it
Mhm.
takes business owners. I was doing a research project, is observational research, and my whole goal for this project was to go in a place and just observe how people treat those who appear to be unhoused. Right. I went and
Mm.
sat at a coffee shop local to College Park, not too far away from our organization. I just sat out there time and time again. People who were close to the Atlanta airport, going to catch flights, standing outside with their suitcases, briefcases, using Wi-Fi on the phone, ordering coffee, chit chatting. Neighbors in the community who were unhoused came to stand outside, maybe to use the Wi-Fi to look up for a job,
Sure.
or to find research. Where's the next best place to stay tonight,
Mhm.
etc. The workers in this coffee shop came outside, called the police, right? The police shows up, you know, pushes the person away. I wrote up this whole paper. I took it back and I gave it to the owner. I said, "This is what I observed happening here. Where's the
Mhm.
empathy?" Right? I was loitering. I was on the Wi-Fi. I didn't even buy coffee. Went through all this list of things. You know what this owner did? He brought me back in to do an empathy training.
No
How
kidding.
do we
Wow.
best how do we best service those who are
Well, this
unhoused?
is a reminder that,
Next
if
thing
you
you
if
know,
you tell
free
people
Wi-Fi,
right.
coffee. Yeah.
If you explain to them the situation, I mean,
Yes.
this is where I always have optimism. I'm like, human beings, you know,
We
people
have
suck.
capacity.
People may suck, but human beings individually are great, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
always the joke. Yeah, collectively we're terrible.
Yes.
Individually we're fantastic. And
Yes.
you just identified a moment where a little bit of education about
A
something.
little bit of
Yeah,
education goes a long way.
yeah,
Education is the pathway to empathy, or it should be.
yeah.
If you have an open heart and you're willing to learn, right?
Uh-huh.
Um we learn to become better. And what better way to become better than by showing compassion to someone else in your
Mhm.
surroundings? And it just does not have to be I mean, it doesn't have to be someone who is unhoused or without an address. It can
Right,
just be a normal person. And I think we have become so polarized that we make decisions without being proximate to people. That's politically, right?
right, yeah,
Socially. We make decisions based on second and third hand information, not actually being proximate to the
right,
stories that actually matter. We make decisions even about education without actually going to visit the school that a policy or the way that you
yeah,
speak about something may cause harm or
right,
damage to a student that you've never even met. And I think the enemy of belonging, the enemy of community itself is distance. And that's
mhm.
what you're saying. Yeah.
Um, you're, also a pastor, um, and the role of faith, um, I'm hot and cold on faith personally, and
Okay.
that's
Why
all
is
right,
that? Why is that?
it's more of a, um well, I mean, as someone who's Jewish, it's hard to
Mm.
accept, and this is with a lot of Jews.
Yeah.
It's hard to accept the experience of the Holocaust and believe in God sometimes, which
Yeah.
is and frankly, it's a question I've always had to African Americans, which is,
Yeah.
uh, how do you have so much faith given, how poorly American society treated, African Americans in the 19th and 20th centuries, right? It's just sort of the same. So I go, and yet faith communities are so important
Mm.
to sort of frankly thawing out some relationships and to teach empathy. So I'm always of this of mixed relationship just on my personal, and that's my own personal journey on
Yeah,
faith.
yeah, sure.
And at the same time, the importance of faith communities in frankly keeping community, right? I think one of our biggest breakdowns in society is the loss of community. We've been talking about it here. Some of this has to do, I think about it just in the space that I live in, which is the media. I think the biggest problem with trust in media is we lost local news, right? When we had local news, local journalists, they were the character references for national journalists
Mm,
because local journalists at their best are service oriented and they're the empathy. They're the
but
community's voice to ask for empathy. They're the ones that are there identifying, you know,
on
issues
the
that
ground.
right, exactly. And then when we gutted it, okay, we did, it turned out to be like that piece of that one piece in Jenga. We pulled the wrong thing and the entire information ecosystem collapsed.
Sure.
And we don't have community, that newspaper, that they provided a community.
Mm.
And so without it, it's faith leaders that are the last bastion of local community.
Wow.
So how, that I think that is so that's where I'm probably giving too much here, but that's why I understand the need for it, and at the same time, I understand why personally for some people it's, faith is it, but there's your personal relationship on faith, and then there's the collective nature of
Yeah.
community that faith leaders bring.
Yeah. Man, I wanna say that I join you, um, in that, um, theodicy is one of those types of, wrestles that you have, uh, even in the context of saying that you claim a faith or you have faith,
Mhm.
there are always questions that just boggles the mind to the point where it's like, "But this happened, but this" you can pick
Totally
up
unexplainable. Well,
you
or
know
they
what I mean?
are, right, unexplainable if you believe in the higher power,
Exactly.
explainable if you don't.
Exactly, exactly, and when you think about natural evil versus general evil, I mean, you can get into the whole I what I see faith doing in the context of how I show up, because I don't consider myself a traditional faith leader. Most faith leaders are standing in a pulpit or some type of a synagogue on a certain morning that they claim is sacred,
Mhm.
and they're communicating. My faith journey has led me into what I would consider, um, you know, parts of the community that are left isolated. I'm, engaged with the person who may have gotten their meal out of a trash can, or someone who was put out of a public space because they asked to wash their hands or use the restroom. Community members who come to us for food resources because they have more month at the end of their money. And I get a chance to see faith working and operating when people come together. And I do think faith for certain communities has been a tool for survival. It's a refuge when people get a chance to come together and have a collective faith to say we will survive this together, right? There's
Sounds like your faith is in humanity more than it is anything else.
yeah, it is in the divine, but it is also in the power of how the divine shows up in
Mhm,
gathering of people, right?
mhm.
Faith as a form of resistance, faith as a vision for a different world. Faith can do immeasurable things. I mean, right now we are using technology and products and all of these
Yeah.
things as a result of someone's faith and initiative to create these resources and tools so people can hear us. And so I still do believe that there's good when people come together, and I think faith is at the center of it.
Mm. Um, I think about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish and the message you're trying to send, and here we have one of the when you think about the resources that you didn't have when you were in school, you know, the dismantling of the Department of Education.
Yeah.
How much strain is that putting on your nonprofit? How much strain is that putting on the nonprofits and a lot, because, there was still not enough resources that the
Yeah.
feds were providing, and what people don't understand in public school systems, the Department of Education is essentially there to help schools that have special needs students or schools that have, it's not about the regular parts of public education. It's about the special necessity part of public education, helping give access to public education to kids who maybe have disabilities or maybe need extra work. And now we're going to cut all this funding. It's going to get shoved as a block grant in some form or another. The
Yeah.
challenges that's going to present your organization, the challenges that presents the community as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot about McKinney-Vento, which again was the first federal policy that actually named homelessness as a national crisis. It was passed in 1987. That was later rolled up under um, the Department of Education. And so McKinney-Vento is, it ensures that unhoused students have access to, take their immunization or have access to school, even if they can't provide an address, have access to meals, have access to supports, outside of the normal hours of education, whether that be an after school program, etc. And I am worried that,
By the way, there's one thing to have legal access to those things, but
yeah.
how do you practically have access to it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Implementation is huge, right? And when, funding shifts and cuts, right? You don't have the sort of faculty or staff power to ensure that some of those things are actually implemented on the ground level, which actually in turns harms students. I would say that many nonprofits probably will be impacted as well as ours because people see themselves as being more self-preserving, so you don't have a lot of people giving to nonprofit organizations. Maybe they give volunteer time, which is a great
Mhm,
alternative, right? But then, there are organizations who were federally funded. Like we have colleagues who had after-school programs
mhm.
where, for months their grant dollars were held up and they weren't able to service students, right, who actually needed them, um, the support. Or we're starting to see educators saying that the school system did away with their role, right, and they're going to have to reshuffle the cards, and educators are now having to commute to another part of town, maybe an hour away, to show up and provide support for maybe a student population who doesn't really need the resources, right? And so you're starting to see a lot of that shuffling, but I still have hope, and here's why: because our organization has always been what I describe a movement of doers. We've always been volunteer driven.
Mhm.
We've been supported by the community. We're pretty stable, and we are dreaming of new ways to show up and support those who will be least likely to have access to those resources. And so, while
Does
there
the school
are
system in
challenges,
Atlanta work with you directly? Do you work with the school system?
yes, yeah,
Yeah,
I actually we're working in Title I schools.
yeah.
We launched an initiative called Zion's Closet. I described it a little
Right.
earlier, which I'm really excited about, and
So
we're
Zions Club, is that a physical space
it's a
near
physical
Title
space.
One? Is the idea that you
Uh,
wanna have these
they're
spaces
they're
near
inside the school,
in
so
Title One schools? Okay, so a place
yeah,
in Title One schools
it's a
to get
resource center.
clothes, shower, things like
Washing
that?
machines,
Yeah.
dryers, like a principal, like the one that we just recently launched in APS at Fitch Elementary has the largest unhoused population of students.
Mhm.
They gave us a classroom and we retrofitted it. Parents can come in and wash clothes. It's all sorts of refrigeration there. It's access to uniforms. There's a computer lab where the digital divide doesn't provide parents to actually fill out job applications. We partner with an Atlanta Hawks player actually
Mm.
to get this started, which is another form of, someone who's playing professional ball wants to be proximate to this population in a way that's really tangible and supported our efforts to do so. And that initiative has started to another school. We're about to launch here at the end of August, and then we have
Love
5
hearing that.
schools waiting already. Yeah.
So you feel like you're on the verge of scaling this
Oh,
in a
yeah,
substantial
most
way.
definitely, because the need is growing.
Yeah.
When you
Uh,
talk to a principal and she said, "Man, I thank you so much that you're retrofitting this classroom where all of the resources that we need are right here in the school,"
mhm.
because, most times a social
It's a
worker
school as
may.
community center, which I think a
Yeah.
lot of people have envisioned
Yes.
that we ought to lean into this,
Yes.
that the school is a 24-hour resource, not
Yes.
necessarily just a 7 to 3 resource, right?
Exactly. A
Yeah,
24-hour resource. Um, yeah, schools, churches, synagogues,
right.
when you think about them, all of the students or those who are represented, whether it's educators and or students, are connected to a stream of relationships and families, and it extends so far, and so it is a community source.
Uh, Terence Lester, I could keep going. This has been, very, I've loved this conversation. I've loved learning from you on this, and, I hope folks, if they wanna help, they wanna contribute, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, check us out, lovebeyondwalls.org, click Zion's Closet. We have documentaries on there, even a documentary where I filmed myself walking from Atlanta all the way to Washington, DC to raise
Oh,
awareness
nice.
about homelessness. It took me 2 months,
Yeah.
and, I recorded stories and, talked about all of it. If you're in local to Atlanta, come and volunteer with us. We are actively engaged in community every single week. It's not something that we just talk about online. And, if you wanna read any of the books, if you have children, I wrote a children's book on, how to teach your child how to be empathetic and compassionate towards those who are unhoused. I tell my story in this new book, and connect with me. Google,
There you
Terrence
go.
Lester, connect,
You can find you all sorts of your all right, let
Yep.
me end on a super light note.
Alright.
Um, I grew up in Miami, you grew up in Atlanta. I would
Yep.
argue both cities get grief for not being passionate sports cities, meaning that we're filled with fair we're like both cities get hit with the fair weather fan hit, that we,
Okay,
trust
okay.
me, I get it, and I know it, and I would say, "Well, I'm sorry that Miami and Atlanta have so much to do that we only wanna support winners." Um, but what's the of the 4 teams, what's the one that when they're good, the city's in a better mood? Like, what's the team that puts the
The
city in its best
Falcon
mood?
the
Is it the Dirty
Falcon
Birds?
yes. I mean, you talk about attitude of a thermostat of attitude on the
Yeah.
wall. You walk over to it. If the Falcons are doing well, I mean, people are nicer in the grocery stores. It
That's
doesn't
bigger
matter
than
where you
Georgia
go.
is
Like,
it bigger than Georgia football?
ah,
Or is it a
oh,
close yeah,
it's not bigger in terms of crowd participation, right?
right, yeah.
College football is just what it
I
is.
know, it's you're
But when it
w
comes to
yeah,
Atlanta making the playoffs and there's
yeah,
a possible pathway to the Super Bowl, I still hate we lost years ago, but
yeah,
you know, the whole city, the mayor, the council members,
yeah.
everybody, you may get
Well,
a
there
phone
was a
call.
it's funny you bring up the Falcons. I'm a New York Times crossword puzzle geek, and,
Okay.
they were a clue earlier this month,
Oh,
and it
wow.
was and it was not a clue you would love, which is the oldest franchise not to win a title of the 4 major sports, and it was the Falcons.
Yeah. And that's why it's a love-hate relationship.
Right.
What about
No,
you?
I get it. I
Sports.
get it. Well, I'm all over the place. I grew up in like I said, I grew up during the heyday of the University of Miami. For me, Miami football is the be all end all. So,
Okay.
my mood changes the most, depending on whether they win or lose. Then I'm like here in Washington, I'm a huge Nats fan. My son's a big Nats fan, so that also impacts our mood.
Oh,
But
nice. Right.
college, I am, when look, Miami remade college football, and I got to be there for it. So that's and I didn't fully get it until you don't have it anymore, and you're like, oh man.
Yeah. Yeah. I see you with the shirt on. Is that Miami
Oh,
shirt?
it is. I got it. My oldest is a senior. My oldest is a
Okay,
senior
okay.
there. So
Awesome.
I'm also contributing, literally.
Yeah. Literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dr. Lester, this has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Chuck. It's
All
been
right,
a
you got it.